Good evening, you're watching Estuary TV News. Coming up, we let some sunshine into the abyss at the Deep in Hull, we count the cost of debts incurred by Christmas spending, and I'll be talking to Jim Morrison about the merits or otherwise of haggis as we prepare for Burns Night. Welcome to Estuary TV News. I'm Hugh Richards. First of all, it's over to James Dunn for the news headlines.
Hello, in the headlines today, a Hull landmark could get a new lease of life and truckers in tutus. Hull City Council hope to transfer the National Picture Theatre into a memorial to those who lost their lives in World War II to kickstart regeneration of the area. In a meeting yesterday, they decided to serve the owners with a compulsory purchase order. It's hoped that the National Civilian World War II Memorial Trust can preserve the site after they campaigned for redevelopment. The council hope it will kickstart regeneration in the Beverley Road area. Centres have made it even easier for people to donate. The former Blockbuster store just off the A180 is now a shop and drop centre which will act as a central point for donations and a flagship charity store. With easy access and a large car park, fundraisers hope it will mean even more people can get behind the charity.
We've recognised more and more people very kindly supporting us, and what we want to do is make it more accessible for them to come in either first thing in the morning or even last thing at night so they can drop their donations off.
Morrison's will be doubling its fish processing operation and creating new jobs with a new food facility on Europark in Grimsby. The former Kerry Food site has been empty since 2012 when the Irish firm closed its doors due to financial losses made on the site. 337 jobs were lost when the old firm moved out. Morrison's has now bought the facility, allowing them to process 250 tonnes of fish a week, which they say will help match the increasing demand in their stores for fresh fish. East Riding Council is to charge protesters for removing the camp they set up around a site near Walkington. The council issued enforcement notices in December requiring the protesters at the Crawberry Hill site to remove caravans, tents, wooden structures by January the 7th due to safety concerns. This was not done, so the council hired contractors to remove the camp yesterday. They'll now seek to recover the cost from the anti-fracking protesters. And finally, if you're driving around on local roads next week, don't be surprised to see a trucker driving around wearing a tutu. It's part of a fundraising mission for the British Heart Foundation, and truckers from this area are meeting at the Stockyard truck stop on the M18 before work on January the 31st. So from me, bye for now.
For conservation, not profit, is the mantra of one of the area's most popular visitor attractions in Hull. Opened in 2002 and close to the iconic tidal barrier, the Deep is on the confluence of the rivers Hull and Humber, and now it's looking to lead the way on generating its own power. Dan Kemp went to find out more.
The Deep is home to a huge variety of species, from those from colder climates to some which may be more at home on a beach. But as you can imagine, maintaining their new homes uses a vast amount of energy.
Our slogan is for conservation, not for profit, and that's not just a slogan, that we live by that in our conservation work, in everything we do, how we source the food that we use in the restaurant, our recycling policies, and our energy policy is important.
They're set to fit 300 solar panels located on the roof of the adjacent business centre. The Deep say it'll save around £10,000 a year, paying back their investment within 6 years. Over their 20-year lifespan, they could save the Deep up to £250,000. And it's hoped the Deep will prove to other businesses that installing solar panels is viable. Martin Bleasby from Discover Energy is pushing others to follow their lead.
I think it's awareness, really. Awareness as well as the access to capital for businesses. It's not been as there as much with the economy. Obviously we're on the upturn now, so banks are lending more and more. They are taking the cash incentive from the feed-in tariff into account now. So there's a lot more lending there now, and I think now's the time what businesses should start looking at it. It's a good sound financial investment, as well as helping reduce their electricity bills and protecting the electricity bills from future price rises.
And this is the latest step in making one of Hull's most popular attractions sustainable.
For us, it's really important that all the electricity that we buy is green. We've been doing that for a number of years, but if we can actually generate it on site and we know that that's completely carbon neutral, then that's an even better solution for us.
You're watching Estuary TV News. A little later in this programme, James Dunn will be in the studio to round up this week's business in local government, and Dan Kemp will bring you all the sports news. Sunday is Burns Night, when Scots across the world and anybody with the slightest Scottish connection will attempt to enjoy haggis, neeps and tatties, genuinely enjoy beautiful whisky, and wish fair fa your honest sonsie face, great chieftain of the puddin' race, all in honour of their national bard. I'm joined by Jim Morrison, who understands Robert Burns. Jim, many thanks for coming in.
Welcome, it's nice to be here, Hugh.
You'll be celebrating Burns Night on Sunday?
We do it a day earlier because Sunday is not a good day to have a ceilidh. So we will be doing it on Saturday night.
Because you might want to have a little bit of a sleep in on Sunday morning.
And we will obviously drop into Sunday by the time we finish anyway.
What's your organisation, what's your dinner all about?
The organisation is the Scots Society of St Andrew, Grimsby, Cleethorpes area. And obviously it's to celebrate Burns' birthday, which is the 25th, but we do it the day early.
And you're pretty much booked out there. There's no point in anyone turning up for...
We are very booked out. Some people have had to come off with ill health, which has been pleasing because we're over our number, but we were well over 100 people turning up to the event this time.
We're a long way from Scotland. Why is it that Burns Night is so popular on the banks of the Humber?
Well, Burns basically is the greatest poet in the world. And I'm not biased at all, of course. But the facts are as well that Grimsby, being a fishing port, also has a lot of Scottish connection with the fishermen. So there are a lot of Scots in the area as well. Burns, on top of that, was a Freemason. And the Freemasons worldwide will celebrate Burns as well. So he's a well-celebrated person and probably the most celebrated under the obvious people like Queen Victoria, possibly.
Burns Night has associated with all sorts of very specific, quite well-regimented rituals, and it's almost liturgical. Just to give me a quick reminder of what will happen on any typical Burns Night supper.
Typical Burns Night, obviously we have our piper, who pipes the main party in and then pipes the haggis in. We will then go through the rigorous part of killing the haggis.
I think just to stop you there, I think your pipe is almost as old as Robert Burns, isn't he?
Very close. He is actually a Grimbarian, I believe, and he is round about 95-year-old and probably the oldest marching piper in the world, and probably definitely Britain.
It's all that puff that keeps him going for so long, I guess. Forgive me, I interrupted. Then you murder the haggis. You
murder the haggis, and then onto a good glass of whisky, and you have your haggis, neeps and tatties. We do add a full meal to it for the night, and to celebrate his night we then go on to a proper ceilidh, proper Scottish Highland dancing.
Do you like haggis?
I love haggis.
Really?
I love haggis.
What, the chopped up sheep's offal in a sheep's stomach?
There is nothing wrong with good food, and where the good food comes from doesn't matter if you know or not, but if you enjoy it, that's the most important.
I confess I like haggis as well, but only when it's washed down with a decent dram of whisky. I find that does help.
It does help, it does help.
This is where, sorry, I'm taking you through the agenda of the evening, but this is where the poetry comes in, of course, isn't it? There are various addresses to be made.
It certainly is. We will do the normal parts, which is the immortal memory to Burns, which we'll go through his history, etc. And of course we have to finish with his most important part, which is to the ladies.
Of course.
And a lady's reply, of course.
But having in there somewhere address to the haggis, that was all my nonsense about the puddin' race thing was about.
Yes, the address to the haggis obviously is, again, will be done by a local Grimsby man who makes a first-class job of it. The address to the haggis takes a few minutes, but it starts the night off the way it should.
Just give us the first stanza of that address to the haggis.
What can I remember that?
No, sorry, I put you on the spot.
You've put me in the spot. I'm not very good at remembering poetry, but
the people who do perform this, and it is a performance, it's always well, probably not read out, but recited in the original.
Somebody doing it well will recite it because it's difficult. The language is difficult to understand, and being old language as well, some words are probably not even used in Scotland anymore.
Well, Robert Burns' poetry, as he said, it's still terribly popular. And you did mention that the most important part is the address to the ladies, of course, towards the end. He was an old lech, wasn't he? I mean, Robert Burns couldn't walk past a young woman, could he?
He was a proper man, a typical man. He loved the ladies, and why should we not? And a lot of his poems show how much admiration he had for them. You take the songs like My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose, I'm sure every lady would like that with your bunch of roses in your hand when you see them.
He was he's a very prolific poet. It is an old language. He's not easy to understand. Why is he still so popular?
He's so popular because he shows the feeling that a human should have. You take a poem like Te Amus. He ploughed young mice up. The mice couldn't move, you know, poor wee timorous beastie. But the feeling he shows is so good. His romantic attitude is so good. And I'm sure every man would like to be the same and show their feelings the same.
Just to remind ourselves a little bit about him, he was an 18th century gentleman, mostly living in Ayrshire.
Mainly Ayrshire, yes.
Farmer's son, so a lowland Scot rather than a Highlander,
Yes.
and on the west coast there, south of Glasgow. What did he do for a living? He didn't make a living out of money, out of writing poetry.
He did a bit of, no, he did in the partially, but it was a bit of a mix because obviously he was a farmer's son and lived on the farms partially as well. But it's a very difficult part of the country to make money on the farms. He did become the hated exciseman for a period of time.
He was a tax collector, wasn't he?
A tax collector, and whisky people in Scotland don't like that because there's a very high rate of tax on it. Which national drink we regret that.
Well, I think that's regretted universally, I'm afraid. He's perhaps because of the Scottish diaspora. Scots have gone everywhere in the world. You know, the Scots famously made the British Empire and all that, but there still are Scots communities in every part of the world. Very few towns in the world, from China to darkest Peru, would be without a Scots community. And Burns has gone with them, hasn't he? Burns is an international phenomenon.
He certainly has. Burns' statue is probably one of the top statues in the world in quantity, all around the world. And you're right that Russia, China, all these people had things for Burns. He's even been in outer space being read by an astronaut who was up there and basically took a book of Burns with him.
Well, I think that's a statistic about the statues. Apart from religious statues, what is it?
He's
Robert
probably
Burns
one of the top three. Queen Victoria, possibly more.
Yeah.
And the only other one would be Christopher Columbus.
Right.
And neither of them wrote poetry.
Burns Night has been going since quite soon after his death, which is sometime in the 1790s, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
So Burns Night, that's a tradition. Is that a tradition that's becoming increasingly popular as the years go by?
It's becoming more popular all the time. In modern day times, it's more difficult because of all the medias, etc., because people haven't got the small localities that kept it going. But there's such a number of people worldwide, Freemasons, ourselves, Scots people, who want this tradition to carry on, and rightfully so, because once again, if every person in the world listened to his basic systems, a man's a man for all that, the turmoil today would not exist, because all these people creating problems in the world would agree that we're all equal and correctly so.
So it's not just an excuse for a bit of an ease up.
Oh, definitely not.
Okay.
We just use it as an end product where we will create something well worthwhile.
Jim, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful evening. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we will.
You might think that January is a tough time for many families after the expensive abundance of Christmas, but for some, January is ignorant bliss before they're plunged into difficulties when the credit card statements arrive in February. And although the recession may be over, the problem of debt in North East Lincolnshire is growing. James Dunn has more on the busiest month of the year for debt advice.
Christmas, a time of plenty for all, but many people are forced to borrow to make the festive season special.
Leading up to Christmas time, we are particularly busy with loans. We have a lot of loan applications. As you can imagine, demand for loans to help people with Christmas presents. We did find this year particularly the demand would really increase. But we do take a lot of care with loan applications to make sure that people can afford the repayments.
After New Year and taking the tree down, many families across the region are forced to face the financial decisions they made in December. And for most, that time is around the beginning of February.
That's because people have perhaps overspent at Christmas, they've spent more than they intended to, or perhaps haven't realised they spent that much. And sometimes people come in and tell us, oh, you know, we brought the extra few presents and didn't realise we'd gone over the top. So that tends to be what people come in and report to us. It's what we locally call in the Bureau is when the credit card bills come through the door, that's when people realise there's a problem.
And it's becoming more of a problem. In 2 years, there's been a 25% rise in the total debt Grimsby's Citizens Advice Bureau has advised on. In the 2015 financial year, it will top £2 million. And to those in difficulty, the message is simple. Don't bury your head in the sand.
Get advice straight away. Don't sit on it. Don't feel that it's going to go away. Open letters. You'd be surprised how many people come into us with unopened letters because they didn't open them. They're frightened about what's inside. And then all of a sudden what they think is a bad debt problem gets much, much worse because there's an awful lot more debts added to it or interest added to debts. So it's get advice early, deal with it, don't feel ashamed, don't be reluctant, and come and talk to us.
Now I'm with James Dunn to round up this week's business in the local councils and local government. James, what's going on?
Well, there's plenty going on, as there always is, because we've got the four councils, northern Lincolnshire, so that's north and northeast, and then East Riding and Hull on the North Bank. But I'm just going to focus on two meetings, I think, today.
And forgive me, James. And now for What You Say, more confusion from English as she is regionally spoken.
Nunty. Odd.
Old-fashioned and
Strange.
curly stockings and oh dear.
Nunty, yeah, it's old-fashioned.
Bit nunty's like a bit old-fashioned, frumpy.
I'm nunty. I'm old-fashioned, I'm 94.
If you're a bit nunty, it's usually if you're not kind of up with it, with the fashion and things.
A bit off, a bit old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned, old school. Suppose you'd say old school.
Old-fashioned or quirky.
Nunty. A bit old-fashioned.
Well, that is
That's
not
me.
my mum. She's not nunty.
And apologies for a slight technical error there. We forgot to plug something in. James is back with me now to talk about business and local councils this week.
You can hear me now, Hugh?
I can hear you now, James. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I mean, the first thing I wanted to talk about was this is a meeting in Grimsby, this North East Lincolnshire Council, and they're going to be talking about domestic abuse. Now, I think it's quite interesting because actually domestic abuse a few years ago is something that people very much didn't like to talk about. Now here, and this is on the 22nd, the Crime and Disorder Committee at Grimsby Town Hall, they're going to be talking basically about a more joined up approach so that they can help deal with domestic abuse better, because obviously there are a number of agencies involved, so everything from social care to the police, even education. You know, actually there's a lot of agencies who could pick these things up. Now, there's actually a report on the council website, and interestingly it says that despite their best efforts, because they are actually already working in partnership, many of these organisations, there is a greater need for increased partnership working, increased capacity and increased work resource. And I think the thing that's actually quite interesting about that is that this comes at a time when local councils are cutting back massively. So I don't know how they're going to find that extra money, if that is indeed what they need and what they're proposing, but this is one of the things that they will be discussing at the meeting.
Quite political as well, because a lot of people might argue that prevention of domestic abuse and domestic violence is something that should be a priority for any local government, and more of a priority than many of the other things that they spend money on.
It certainly is, and another thing that makes this all the more interesting is that I think it's today actually at the Guildhall in Hull, the crime panel, they're people who are to do with the oversight of the Police and Crime Commissioner, they're going to be arguing for Humberside Police to protect resources that help tackle domestic abuse. So even though, you know, like local councils, the police are also going to be suffering budget cuts, they're going to be saying that actually it's going to be much more sensible to protect those resources to prevent these things than to have to deal with the fallout afterwards.
And it's also, of course, quite a difficult crime to prosecute because it's very difficult to get proof beyond reasonable doubt of circumstances that, so tragically go on so often in private.
That's probably the hardest part actually, is to get people to testify, because if it's loved ones, sometimes it's very difficult.
It's an appalling issue, isn't it?
It is. I'm going to move on now. This is something that's going on in Hull actually, and it's a little bit different to the average thing that I usually talk about. It's about the internet. Now, anyone who lives in Hull will know about the internet in Hull. There's essentially one provider really who've got a bit of a monopoly over the market, and that's KC. I'm sure there are other ways in which you can get internet through satellite, but I know KC are by far the main provider.
They've got it pretty wrapped up, haven't they?
Yeah, it's a very strange situation actually for a metropolis.
And the council's resolution on this matter is?
Well, council don't have a resolution essentially, but on the 22nd at the Economy and Regeneration Overview, KC are going to be setting out their plan for the future. There's very little in the report so far. They talk about the 11 million they've already spent since 2011.
And they'll be answerable to the council for their plans.
Well, we hope so, yeah.
James, thank you very much. That's all from James, but now it's over to Dan Kemp with the sport.
The route for next year's Tour of Yorkshire has been announced. It will be the first time the event has been staged, following on from the incredibly successful Grand Départ for the Tour de France, which set off from the county last summer. Stage 1 will start in our area on the coast in Bridlington before travelling north to Scarborough. Stage 2 will pass through Beverley on its way between Selby and York, whilst the third and final day will finish off in Leeds. It will run between the 1st and the 3rd of May. Hull Stingrays player assistant coach Carl Lozon is disappointed that the side missed an opportunity for a 4-point weekend in the Elite League. The Rays won 6-3 in Kirkcaldy on Saturday evening, but only managed to convert 1 of 11 power play chances in a 3-2 defeat to the Fife Flyers on Sunday. Grimsby Town will be hoping that tonight they can finally play their FA Trophy replay at Gateshead after the weather caused a second replay postponement on Monday. The game kicks off at Gateshead's International Stadium at 7:45 this evening. In tennis, on his Australian Open debut, Ticton's Kyle Edmund was beaten in straight sets 6-4, 6-4, 6-3 against American 38 in the world Steve Johnson. A noble fight by Edmund, having to contend with both the ferocious heat in Melbourne plus the 154-place difference in the current world rankings. Hull Ionians host their annual sporting lunch on Friday the 20th of February for the East Riding Wooden Spoon charity at Brantingham Park. The event starts at midday, and this year's guest speaker is current RFU chairman and former England international Bill Beaumont CBE. And finally, former Grimsby Town CC overseas spinner George Linday is making great progress in South Africa with the Cape Cobras. Last month he played his part in the Ramslam T20 Challenge, including in the final where he made 3 catches in the outfield. And that's all for the sport.
Thank you very much, Dan. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid, today. If you do have a story for us, please go to our Facebook or Twitter pages. Details on the screen. Email news@estuary.tv or phone Grimsby 35561. Until tomorrow from me, good evening.
Hello and welcome to Estuary TV's weather. Frost in places with fog patches, slow to clear on Thursday, staying mainly dry and a little brighter than of late, with some sunny spells likely and a maximum temperature of 4 degrees. Friday cloudy with rain and hill snow and increasing winds later,